On October 14, 2012, in the treacherous Peck River Valley of Afghanistan, U.S. Army Staff Sergeant Ben Carter vanished. During a chaotic firefight, his unit was ambushed, and in the aftermath, he was gone. The official report listed him as killed in action, body not recoverable. His life, his future, his memory, all were sealed behind a wall of military reports and a folded flag handed to his grieving wife. For 5 long years, this was the accepted truth. A hero had fallen, another casualty in a distant war. The case was closed, a scar on the heart of his family and his unit. But the story was far from over. 5 years later, his wife, scrolling through her phone thousands of miles away, would stumble upon a single grainy photograph. It was a picture that should not exist, showing a man who should have been dead. What she saw in that image would not only shatter the official narrative, but would also ignite a desperate search for a truth far more sinister and complex than anyone could have imagined. It would reveal that Ben Carter didn't just vanish. He was erased. Ben Carter was more than a soldier. He was the steady center of his own small universe. To his wife, Chloe, he was the man who could make her laugh even on the worst days. The one who left goofy notes in her car and always called just to say hello. His voice a warm reassurance from halfway around the world. They had met in college, a whirlwind romance built on late-night study sessions and shared dreams. He was studying history. She was studying art. He was drawn to the past, to the stories of honor and sacrifice, while she looked to the future, to the beauty she could create. They were a perfect balance. Their wedding was a small, simple affair just before his first deployment. The memory of his hand in hers, his promise to always come home, became the anchor of her life. His ambition was straightforward: serve his country with distinction, then return home to be a father. They had a son on the way, a boy named Leo, and Ben's letters from Afghanistan were filled with plans. He wrote about teaching Leo how to fish in the creek behind their house, about building the most epic treehouse in the neighborhood, about coaching his future Little League team. He wasn't a man chasing glory. He was a man building a life, one honorable day at a time. Chloe was the quintessential military spouse, strong and resilient, but beneath the surface, a constant thrum of anxiety followed her every move. She managed the household, paid the bills, and attended every ultrasound appointment alone, sending pictures to Ben's field address. She created a community with the other wives, a sisterhood forged in shared fear and unwavering support. They would gather for coffee, their conversations a mix of mundane daily life and the unspoken terror of a knock on the door. Ben's last call home, just 2 days before his final patrol, was seared into her memory. Leo had kicked for the first time, and she'd held the phone to her belly so Ben could feel it. She could hear the joy and awe in his voice, a pure, unvarnished happiness that transcended the thousands of miles of desert and conflict between them. He told her he was proud of her, that he was counting the days. He told her he loved her more than words could say. These were the stakes. It wasn't just a soldier who was lost. It was a husband whose love was a shelter, a father whose dreams were just beginning to take root, a man whose life was a tapestry of small, beautiful moments. He was the future Chloe had bet everything on, the steady presence their son would never know. The life he had was rich and full of purpose, not for a flag or a country in the abstract, but for the woman he loved and the child he couldn't wait to hold. The loss of that life was not a statistic. It was the collapse of a world. The morning of October 14th began with the familiar chill of the Afghan highlands. Ben's ranger platoon was tasked with a reconnaissance patrol through a narrow, winding canyon in the Pech Valley, a known transit route for insurgents. The mission was routine, almost mundane, but the atmosphere felt different. The air was heavy, static. For weeks there had been whispers of a new player in the region, a private military contractor called Aegis Global. They weren't officially part of the coalition command structure, operating in a gray zone of plausible deniability, supposedly providing security for geological survey teams. But their presence felt intrusive, their methods opaque. As Ben's platoon moved deeper into the canyon, they passed an abandoned Aegis Global encampment. It was hastily deserted. Empty crates were strewn about, but these weren't standard military supply boxes. They were reinforced, wooden containers with strange stenciling, more suited for delicate cargo than ammunition or rations. Ben, a history buff, noticed a fragment of faded Farsi script on one broken piece of wood, something about the treasures of Balkh. He pointed it out to his platoon sergeant, who grunted and told him to stay focused. It was a small detail, a flicker of strangeness, but it planted a seed of unease in Ben's mind. An hour later, they rounded a sharp bend in the canyon. Below them, a small convoy of non-military vehicles was parked, flanked by armed men who didn't wear military uniforms. They were Aegis operators, overseeing the loading of similar wooden crates from a hidden cave entrance. It was a tense standoff. Ben's platoon leader, Lieutenant Miller, radioed it in, his voice tight. The response from command was confusing, delayed. They were told to hold their position and observe, but not to engage. The situation felt wrong. These PMCs were operating with an autonomy that defied all protocols. Ben, using his high-powered scope, focused on the men. He saw their faces, hard and professional. He saw the cargo, and then he saw their leader, a man with a cold, predatory gaze who looked directly up at the Rangers' ridgeline position as if he'd known they were there all along. The man raised a hand, not in a wave, but a signal. That's when the first shot rang out, not from the valley below, but from the opposite ridge. It was a coordinated ambush, a classic pincer movement. But the fire wasn't just coming from Taliban positions. The Aegis operators in the valley immediately opened up on the Rangers as well, their fire precise and deadly. They were caught in a three-way crossfire. It was a chaotic, desperate fight for survival. Lieutenant Miller was hit in the first volley. The platoon was pinned down, communications jammed. Ben laid down suppressing fire, trying to create an opening for his men to pull back. He saw two of his comrades fall. In the swirling dust and chaos, he made a risky decision. He broke from his cover, sprinting towards a rocky outcrop that offered a better angle to target the machine gun nest that had them pinned. It was a heroic, selfless act. It was also the last thing anyone in his platoon ever saw him do. When the smoke cleared and reinforcements finally arrived, the valley was silent. The Aegis convoy was gone. The enemy fighters had melted back into the mountains, and Staff Sergeant Ben Carter was nowhere to be found. The initial report from the surviving members of Ben's platoon was chaotic and contradictory. In the disorienting aftermath of the ambush, stories conflicted. Some thought they saw Ben get hit by a burst of machine gun fire. Others swore he was still fighting when they were forced to pull back. The official search began immediately, but it was an exercise in futility. The scene of the firefight was a mess of shell casings, bloodstains, and the debris of a brutal engagement. The first discovery of his absence was not a single moment, but a slow, dawning horror. It was the roll call after the medevac helicopters departed. His name called out into the echoing silence of the valley. Carter. No response. Carter. Silence. The men looked at each other, their faces etched with grime and shock. The absence was a physical void, a hole in their ranks that felt impossible. The search of the immediate area yielded nothing. No body, no equipment, no trail. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Back in Fort Lewis, Washington, two officers in dress uniform drove slowly down Chloe's street. She was outside, trying to coax the last of the autumn leaves into a pile, her pregnant belly a prominent curve under her sweater. When she saw the car, a cold dread washed over her, a feeling so absolute it felt like a physical blow. She knew. Every military spouse knew what that car meant. The world went silent as they walked up her driveway, their faces somber and practiced. The words they spoke were a blur of military jargon and stilted condolences. Firefight. Heroically. Deepest regrets. The phrase that cut through the fog was, killed in action, body not recoverable. It was an impossibly cruel combination of words, offering the finality of death without the closure of proof. In the days that followed, the military's investigation produced a tidy, if unsatisfying, narrative. They found a significant amount of Ben's blood on the rocks near his last known position, confirming he was grievously wounded. The strange clue, the one that should have unraveled everything, was a single peculiar shell casing found near that spot. It was a 7.62 by 39 meter round, but of a rare, specialized, armor-piercing variety, not used by the U.S. military or known to be in Taliban hands. It was logged, examined, and ultimately dismissed as an anomaly, likely a round from a collector's weapon picked up by an insurgent. The official conclusion was that insurgents had overwhelmed Ben's position and, following their grim custom, had taken his body as a trophy before melting away. The case was closed. For the Army, it was a tragic but explainable loss. For Chloe, it was the beginning of a nightmare, a gaping wound of uncertainty. She clutched the flag they gave her, its crisp folds a poor substitute for the man she had lost, and refused to believe it. How could a man so full of life just disappear? The scene of his absence wasn't the blood-soaked rock in Afghanistan. It was her empty house, the silent nursery, the future that had been stolen from her in an instant. The formal search for Ben Carter's remains was a massive undertaking, at least on paper. For 2 weeks, the full might of the U.S. military was ostensibly brought to bear on the Peck River Valley. Helicopters crisscrossed the treacherous terrain, their rotors beating a constant, mournful rhythm. Ground patrols, including members of Ben's own Ranger Regiment, scoured the canyons and cave systems, driven by a desperate need to bring their brother home. But the entire operation was doomed from the start, crippled by a combination of harsh reality and hidden agendas. The external conflicts were immense. The weather turned, blanketing the mountains in an early, unseasonable snow that hid any potential tracks and made flight operations perilous. On the third day, a tragic accident underscored the danger. A Black Hawk helicopter, battling severe downdrafts, clipped a ridge and crashed, killing the 4-man crew. The incident cast a pall over the entire search, a stark reminder of the cost of looking for a man already presumed dead. More insidious, however, was the misdirection. The primary intelligence for the search area was being fed to the command center by liaisons, some of whom had direct ties to Aegis Global, the very PMC Ben's unit had encountered. Aegis, protecting its secrets, provided a steady stream of credible but ultimately false tips. They reported enemy chatter placing Ben's body in a valley miles to the east, sending search teams on a week-long fruitless mission. They fabricated intelligence about a high-level Taliban commander wanting to trade the body for prisoners, a cruel ruse that consumed days of delicate, pointless negotiations. The American command, overwhelmed and dealing with multiple active fronts, accepted the intelligence at face value. They were unknowingly being manipulated by the very people responsible for the disappearance. For Chloe back in Washington, these weeks were a special kind of hell. Every phone call from her casualty assistance officer was a jolt of hope, followed by the crushing weight of disappointment. She became a fixture at the base command, demanding answers, her initial grief hardening into a sharp-edged frustration. Why weren't they searching the area of the original ambush more thoroughly? Why were they trusting intelligence from private contractors? She was treated with a mixture of pity and condescension, a grieving widow who couldn't accept the harsh realities of war. The officers showed her maps, explained the logistical challenges, the weather, the enemy threat. They were textbook explanations, designed to pacify and deflect. The search methodologies themselves were sound, but they were being applied in the wrong places. K-9 units, thermal imaging drones, ground-penetrating radar, none of it mattered if you were looking 10 miles from where you should be. The singular, out-of-place shell casing was buried deep in an evidence file deemed irrelevant. The eyewitness accounts of the Aegis convoy were sanitized in the official report, reduced to a footnote about unidentified non-combatants who had left the area before the main firefight. The system was not designed to investigate a conspiracy. It was designed to process a casualty. After 3 weeks, with resources stretched thin and the trail impossibly cold, the search was officially called off. Staff Sergeant Ben Carter was declared KIA-BNR. His file was closed. The bureaucratic machine had done its job, producing a neat, logical, and completely false conclusion. The family's desperation was now a private burden, their frustration a silent scream against a wall of official certainty. The truth was not just hidden, it was actively buried. The years that followed were cold and empty. The official narrative of Ben's heroic death settled over his memory like a shroud, repeated at memorial services and in newspaper articles. He became a name etched onto the local war memorial, a black and white photo on the mantelpiece, a ghost who haunted the edges of Chloe's life. The case went cold, not because there were no leads, but because the investigation had been terminated. It was a closed chapter, a settled fact. For the world, Ben Carter was a hero. For Chloe, he was a question mark that burned in her soul. She tried to move on, for Leo's sake. Their son grew from a baby into a curious little boy who knew his father only through stories and pictures. He would point to the photo of Ben in his dress uniform and say, "That's my dad. He's a hero in heaven." Each time, the words were a fresh wound for Chloe. She hated the past tense. She hated the finality of it. The lack of a body, the lack of closure, was a unique and cruel form of torture. It left a sliver of impossible hope alive, a tiny flickering ember that refused to be extinguished by the cold reality everyone else accepted. The community treated her with a gentle, suffocating reverence. She was the Gold Star wife, an object of pity and respect, but they couldn't understand the gnawing uncertainty, the feeling that the story they had all been told was a lie. The mystery of Ben's unrecovered body became a piece of local folklore. In the tight-knit military community, whispers sometimes surfaced. Old soldiers from his unit would talk over beers, questioning the official story of the ambush, the strange presence of the PMCs, the way the search was bungled. But these were just whispers, shadows without substance. Ben's last known location in the Peck Valley took on a grim, almost mythical status among the troops who still served there. It was a place to be avoided, a haunted ground. Some of the more poetic soldiers nicknamed the spot Sleeping Beauty's Ridge, a place where an American hero lay in an enchanted, unreachable sleep. The name was meant to be respectful, but for Chloe, when she heard of it through a friend, it was grotesque. Ben wasn't sleeping. He was gone. The emotional toll was immeasurable. Chloe suffered from anxiety and insomnia, waking up in the middle of the night convinced she had heard his key in the door. She drifted through life in a fog of grief and unresolved anger. She maintained a brave face for Leo, but her son could feel her sadness, a constant low-level hum beneath the surface of their lives. The ripple effects of that single day in October 2012 had spread out, touching everyone who had known and loved Ben, leaving a permanent stain of loss and doubt. The world had moved on, but for Chloe and a few loyal friends, time was frozen on that terrible day, trapped in a lingering mystery that felt increasingly, maddeningly hopeless. 5 years to the day after Ben vanished, Chloe was sitting on her couch, the house silent except for the soft breathing of her sleeping son. She was scrolling aimlessly through Instagram, a mindless habit to numb the sharp edges of the anniversary. Her feed was the usual mix of friends' vacations, food pictures, and sponsored posts. Then she saw it, a photo from a popular travel blogger she followed, a man known for documenting his journeys to remote and forgotten corners of the world. The post was tagged, "The vibrant chaos of the Karasuv Bazaar, Uzbekistan." The picture was a riot of color and activity, stalls overflowing with spices, bright textiles, and handcrafted goods. People milled about, their faces a blur of motion. It was a beautiful, unremarkable travel photo, but something in the background snagged Chloe's attention. Her finger froze on the screen. She zoomed in. In the back of the shot, partially obscured by a rack of hanging carpets, was a man. He was haggard, thin, with a beard, but his profile, it was unmistakable. The strong jawline, the way his hair grew at the temple, the set of his shoulders. It was Ben's profile. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It had to be a trick of the light, a cruel coincidence. She zoomed in further, the image pixelating, becoming a mosaic of colored squares. Then she saw the scar, a small, crescent-shaped scar just above his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a childhood fall off a bicycle. It was a tiny, intimate detail she had traced with her finger 1,000 times. No one else would ever notice it, but she saw it. Her breath hitched. The world tilted on its axis. This couldn't be. Ben was dead. He was a name on a wall, but the man in the photo, in a bazaar in Uzbekistan, had Ben's face and Ben's scar. It was a single, impossible clue, dropped into her lap by a random algorithm. The catalyst wasn't a deathbed confession or a new piece of forensic evidence. It was a stray photon captured by a tourist's camera, an image uploaded to the internet and delivered to the one person in the world who could recognize its profound significance. For 5 years, she had been drowning in a sea of hopelessness. In that single, electrifying moment, a hand had reached through the water and pulled her to the surface. She took a screenshot, her hands shaking so badly she could barely operate the phone. The mystery wasn't over. A new lead, fragile and unbelievable as it was, had just been born. Chloe stared at the pixelated image on her phone for hours, her mind racing. Was she going crazy? Was grief finally making her see ghosts? She knew no one would believe her. The army had declared Ben dead. Presenting them with a blurry Instagram photo would get her dismissed as a hysterical widow. There was only one person she could turn to, someone who had been there, who had his own unanswered questions about that day. She called Mark Redding, Ben's former platoon sergeant, now a private investigator in Seattle. He was a man haunted by the loss of his men, especially Ben. When Chloe explained what she found, his initial reaction was cautious skepticism, but he heard the conviction in her voice. He trusted Chloe's instincts, and more importantly, he remembered the strangeness of that day. The Aegis operators, the jammed comms, the bungled search. He agreed to look into it. The first step was digital forensics. Mark hired a tech expert who analyzed the metadata of the original Instagram photo. They confirmed the exact date, time, and GPS coordinates of where the picture was taken in the Karasuv Bazaar. Next, they cross-referenced the image with satellite imagery and street-level photos of the area, confirming the layout of the stalls. It was real. The man with the scar was there. The blogger who posted the photo was cooperative but couldn't remember the man specifically. He was just part of the background scenery. Mark knew this wasn't enough for the authorities. He had to get proof on the ground. Using his own savings and a portion of Chloe's, he booked a flight to Uzbekistan. He was no longer a soldier. He was a private citizen on a high-stakes, off-the-books mission. Arriving in Karasuv, a rough-and-tumble border town, Mark began his investigation. He was a ghost himself, blending in, asking careful questions. He showed the photo to shopkeepers and locals. Most shrugged, but one old rug merchant recognized the man. He didn't know his name, but he knew where men like him were sometimes seen. He pointed towards the desolate foothills outside the city, towards a heavily guarded compound surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. The compound was officially a logistics depot for a new company, Titan Secure Solutions, but the locals knew better. It was a place run by dangerous foreign mercenaries, a place to be avoided. Mark staked out the compound for days. He saw armored vehicles, armed guards in tactical gear, and the familiar cold professionalism of high-level operators. He ran the new company name, Titan, through his contacts. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. Titan Secure Solutions was a rebranded shell corporation. Its board of directors consisted of former executives from Aegis Global, which had been forced to dissolve after a series of scandals. The man in charge of the Uzbekistan operation was the same man Ben had seen through his scope 5 years ago, a ruthless ex-Special Forces commander named Gavin Reed. The truth began to form, a picture more monstrous than they could have imagined. Mark needed to get inside. He found a local man who worked as a low-level supply driver for the compound, a man whose family had been threatened by Reed's men. After intense persuasion and the promise of a large sum of money to get his family out of the country, the driver agreed to help. He provided Mark with schematics of the compound and details on guard rotations. He also confirmed the unthinkable. There was an American prisoner there, a ghost they had held for years, a man whose expertise in military tactics and history was being exploited to help them locate and secure black market artifacts. It was Ben. He hadn't been killed in the ambush. He had been the target. He had seen too much, and Aegis, led by Reed, decided he was more valuable alive than dead. They staged his death, wounded him just enough to leave a blood trail, and spirited him away in the chaos. The firefight wasn't an insurgent ambush. It was a kidnapping operation disguised as combat. The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle was the why. Ben wasn't just a prisoner. He was an unwilling consultant. His knowledge of history and military strategy was being used to plan raids on ancient sites, a practice Reed's men had perfected across the Middle East and Central Asia. They had stolen a man's life and twisted his skills to serve their greed. Mark contacted his old Ranger network. Within hours, a small, highly skilled team of former special operators was on a private jet, flying to a clandestine airstrip near the border. This wasn't a U.S. military operation. This was personal. This was for Ben. The climax was a swift, silent assault under the cover of a moonless night. The team, led by Mark, cut the fences and neutralized the perimeter guards with chilling efficiency. They moved through the compound like specters, their objective a small, isolated cell block at the rear of the facility. Inside, they found him. Ben was emaciated, pale, and bearded, but alive. His eyes, when they met Mark's, held a flicker of disbelief, then a wave of overwhelming recognition. There was no time for emotion. As they prepared to extract him, alarms blared. The compound exploded into a hornet's nest of activity. They fought their way back towards the extraction point. A brutal running gun battle through the concrete corridors. The final confrontation happened at the main gate. Gavin Reed, cornered and furious, stood with a handful of his elite guards, using a line of civilian workers as human shields. He screamed at Mark, a torrent of rage and justification. Ben wasn't a prisoner. He was an asset, a tool. Mark created a diversion, and in the split second of chaos, Ben, weak as he was, acted on pure instinct. He tackled Reed, sending them both to the ground, breaking the standoff. The Rangers swarmed in, and it was over. Reed was captured, his operation shattered. As they bundled a weak but conscious Ben into the waiting vehicle and sped towards the border, the sun was just beginning to rise, casting its first light on a man who was, after 5 long years, finally returning from the dead. The immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of secure communications, diplomatic wrangling, and a global media blackout. Ben was flown to a secure American military hospital in Germany, his rescue a tightly held secret. The men who saved him, his former Ranger brothers, disappeared back into the civilian world as quietly as they had arrived. The official story had to be carefully managed. The revelation that a decorated American soldier had been held captive for 5 years not by terrorists, but by a U.S. allied private military contractor, was an explosive scandal that could destabilize international relations. Arrests were made swiftly and silently. Gavin Reed and the captured Titan executives were rendered to a black site for interrogation. Under pressure, the entire conspiracy unraveled. The why was pure, unadulterated greed. Aegis Global, under the guise of providing security, had been running one of the largest antiquities smuggling operations in modern history. They were looting archaeological sites in conflict zones, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and selling priceless artifacts on the black market to a network of billionaire collectors and corrupt museum curators. The operation was worth billions. Ben's platoon had stumbled upon a major transfer in the Pech Valley. They had seen the crates being loaded from a hidden cave that served as a temporary storehouse for treasures plundered from the National Museum of Afghanistan. Reed couldn't risk a firefight that would draw coalition scrutiny to the area. His plan was more surgical. He orchestrated the ambush using a local insurgent group on his payroll, creating the perfect cover. His primary objective was to capture Ben. Why him? Because during his pre-mission intelligence briefings, Reed had learned of Staff Sergeant Carter's background, his university degree in ancient history, and his noted expertise in the region. Reed saw Ben not as an enemy, but as a potential tool. He faked Ben's death, providing just enough evidence for the Army to close the case, and then held him in a series of secret prisons. For 5 years, Ben was kept in isolation, his will slowly broken down. Reed used a combination of psychological torture and manipulation, forcing Ben to help them identify and authenticate artifacts. They exploited his knowledge to increase their profits. The single non-standard shell casing found at the scene? It was from one of Reed's personal weapons, a custom-built rifle, a small mistake in an otherwise perfectly executed plan. The false intelligence that derailed the search, the political pressure to stand down. It was all orchestrated by Reed and his powerful, well-connected clients who had government officials in their pockets. The truth laid bare a staggering level of corruption that reached the highest echelons of power and finance, a shadow war fought for profit, where a soldier's life was just another commodity to be exploited. Bringing Ben home was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a different, more complicated chapter. The reunion with Chloe took place in a sterile, quiet room at the Ramstein Air Base Hospital. When she walked in, the man she saw was both a stranger and the love of her life. He was gaunt, his eyes holding a haunted, distant look she didn't recognize. The joyful, confident man she had married was buried under 5 years of trauma. She ran to him, and they held each other, a collision of relief, grief, and the profound awkwardness of two people who had been living in different worlds. Their tears were not just of joy, but of sorrow for the years that had been stolen. There was no magic moment of everything being okay. The pain was too deep. The most difficult reunion was with his son. Leo, now 5 years old, met his father for the first time. To him, this quiet, sad man was not the hero from the photographs. He was a stranger. Ben knelt down, his hands trembling, and simply said, "Hi, Leo. I'm your dad." The little boy hid behind Chloe's legs, shy and uncertain. It was a heartbreaking, beautiful, and deeply painful moment. The journey back to a semblance of normalcy was slow and arduous. Ben battled severe PTSD, wrestling with nightmares, paranoia, and the guilt of what he had been forced to do. He had to learn how to be a husband and a father again, how to navigate a world that had moved on without him. Chloe, in turn, had to transition from being a grieving widow to the caregiver of a deeply wounded man. Her own identity had been shattered and now had to be rebuilt alongside his. There were moments of grace amidst the struggle. The first time Ben genuinely laughed at one of Leo's jokes, the night he slept through without nightmares, his hand resting peacefully in Chloe's. The day he took Leo to the park and pushed him on the swings, a simple act of fatherhood he had dreamed of for years. The relief of having him back was immense, a constant low hum of gratitude that underscored every difficult day, but it was forever tinged with the bitterness of their loss. They had won him back, but they could never reclaim the stolen time. Leo's first steps, his first words, 5 years of birthdays and Christmases. It was a victory, soaked in sorrow, a reunion that marked the start of a long, uncertain road to healing. The story of Ben Carter became more than just a soldier's tale. It became a cautionary lesson on the hidden costs of modern warfare. It ripped the veil off the shadowy world of private military contractors, exposing how the privatization of war can lead to unchecked power and grotesque abuses far from public scrutiny. The subsequent investigation, though largely classified, triggered a series of closed-door congressional hearings. The scandal was too explosive for a public trial, but it forced a reckoning within the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. The result was the passage of the Carter Act, a sweeping piece of legislation that dramatically increased oversight of all private security contractors operating in active combat zones. It mandated stricter vetting, clearer rules of engagement, and direct accountability to military command structures, effectively ending the era of PMCs operating in a lawless gray zone. On a more human level, the story became a testament to a different kind of strength. It wasn't just about the valor of the soldiers who rescued Ben, but about the unwavering belief of a wife who refused to accept the official story. Chloe's refusal to let go, her willingness to believe in the impossible based on a grainy photo, became a powerful symbol of love and intuition. The case underscored the universal truth that the deepest bonds are not severed by distance or time, or even by a declaration of death. It also highlighted the profound evil that can fester in the margins of conflict, where greed can lead men to commit atrocities not for ideology, but for profit. Ben Carter's legacy was twofold. Officially, he was the man whose ordeal led to vital reforms, making future soldiers safer. But personally, his legacy was one of resilience, a quiet, daily battle to reclaim his life, to be a father to his son, and to heal alongside the woman who never gave up on him. His story served as a permanent reminder that some of the deepest wounds of war are invisible, carried not by the dead, but by the survivors. A soldier lost to the fog of war was ultimately found by the clarity of his wife's love. Yet, the story of Ben Carter is a stark reminder that even after the rescue, some shadows of war never truly fade, and the cost is paid for a lifetime. If this story of survival, corruption, and unbreakable bonds moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. For more true crime and mystery investigations that uncover the hidden truth, the official story is rarely the whole story. Tell us in the comments if you were in Chloe's shoes. Would you have been able to keep hope alive for all those years?